In today's video, I do want to talk further about Patrick Kane and his future. Where may he end up? We've talked about him previously, linked to a number of teams, including the Toronto Maple Leafs, but an NHL insider has poured cold water on that and suggests that's very unlikely to happen. We'll discuss that scenario and his thoughts on that. Plus, there's rumors that the Calgary Flames have engaged in contract extension talks with newly acquired Mackenzie Weegar. Plus, we have a few more signings as well. We'll discuss all the latest news coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. As I mentioned, we have a variety of NHL news and rumors to take a look at here today. First up, we do have a handful of signings. First up, we have the Buffalo Sabres making another announcement. Of course, they had a mega contract for Tage Thompson yesterday. Today, they do a 2-year extension for goaltender Ukko-Pekka Luukkonen, who was a restricted free agent. Gets a 2-year deal valued at $837,500 per year, so certainly a very fair contract. The first year, which is the year that's coming up, 22-23, it is a 2-way contract, and in the second year, it becomes a 1-way contract, which works well because that's also the point when he would no longer be waivers exempt, so he would need waivers to go down to the minors. We also know that they have other goaltenders, like Craig Anderson, for example, on a 1-year deal. So this kind of takes the pressure off. UPL can be a guy they can go to. Should they run into injury issues or something this year, he can play, mostly be like the main guy at the AHL level, and then at the same time be a call-up option when needed. And then next year, hopefully, he'll be ready to step up and be a full-time NHL goaltender. May not necessarily be the starter, of course. Could be in a 1A, 1B scenario, or maybe even a backup role, depending on what else they do here with the goaltending situation. But certainly a good, fair contract for the young goaltender, who I think they still have hopes for. That could be the goalie of the future, but I know they also have young Devin Levi, who had a phenomenal college season last year. Right now, long-term might be the better option, but like I said, he still has room to grow and develop, and they have to be able to get him signed when he comes out of college, and lots of other moving parts there as well. But they do have a couple of young goalie prospects that look like potential real NHL players down the road. We also got news from the New York Islanders. They've made another signing. Seems like we've talked about them a lot in signings as of late, but this one's a little bit easier deal. They signed one of their 2022 drafted prospect, and that's Callie O'Dalia. So he gets his 3-year ELC. He was taken number 65 overall in this year's draft, and he has been assigned to the SHL in Djurgården, so he will play over there for the upcoming season. No word on exactly when he'll make the jump to the NHL, of course, but he was an interesting prospect that was picked up by the Islanders this year, and at least he gets his entry-level contract official now on the books. Now, Jonathan Dahlen, who was, bounced around a bit in the NHL, hasn't really played a ton of games. He was a fairly high draft pick of the Ottawa Senators originally. I know Sens fans were kind of upset when he was included in a trade with Vancouver back a number of years back when they acquired Alex Burrows. He was a promising prospect. Of course, his father played in the NHL, had good pedigree. But then he went to Vancouver, bounced around there for a while, never really got a huge opportunity. He finally played more last year in San Jose, so he's on his 3rd NHL team, but he was a restricted free agent at the end of the season, and he was not qualified by the Sharks. And new GM Mike Greer, all he put out for a statement on the scenario when he was asked about it was that he just didn't see Dahlen as being a right fit for the team for the upcoming next few years. So certainly Dahlen was left without a home, became an unrestricted free agent. There was rumors that there was interest from other teams. I know at one point there was the Calgary Flames were mentioned quite often as a team who were considering signing Dahlen. Things obviously never materialized there, and now it's been official. There was some rumblings he might head to Europe and maybe play in the SHL. His agent, back a week and probably 2 weeks now, had denied it up until this point, and it was probably something they were looking at as a plan B if an NHL opportunity didn't materialize, which appears to be the case now because he signed a 5-year deal over to play in Sweden. So I'm not sure that he's going to be making the jump back to the NHL anytime soon. Obviously, given his limited opportunity and how things have gone so far, it's really difficult to say if there would be opportunity anyhow. And I'm not sure. Sometimes players do sign European contracts, and sometimes there's an out if they get an NHL opportunity that they can be released from that. I don't know if that's included in his contract over there or not. So we'll have to see. But Jonathan Dahlen will not be returning to the NHL, at least for the short term, and will be playing in Sweden. One rumor that's been circulating as well around the Calgary Flames, which is really not overly far-fetched, but there is speculation from Dave Pagnota at thefourthperiod.com that Brad Treliving, the general manager, has engaged with contract extension talks with newly acquired defenseman Mackenzie Weegar. Of course, was part of that mega blockbuster deal that came over with Jonathan Huberdeau for the Matthew Tkachuk trade. That kind of shocked everybody a few weeks back earlier this summer. Of course, Huberdeau's since been signed to a long-term deal. I know he and Weegar had both made comments in their first media availability after being signed that they were certainly interested for sure. I know at one point we saw Treliving make a point to fly out and meet with Huberdeau in person. I'm not sure if he's done anything like that with Weegar or not, but there are talks. I mean, at this point, you have to think with Weegar coming in that the Calgary Flames have one of the deepest blue lines in the NHL. So I do wonder if they are successful in getting an extension done with Weegar, that I wonder if somebody else gets moved. It might not necessarily be somebody who's lower in the depth chart. It could be somebody who's making more money, just because I do think Weegar's going to be able to demand a pretty good contract. You could argue he's a fair bit underpaid right now, so he's definitely going to want a good raise on his next contract. It's reasonable to think that he's probably going to want, I'm going to say $7 million. I wouldn't be shocked if that's what he's looking for. At least 6.5, 7, maybe more. I really don't know what he wants, but I know it's going to be a hefty number compared to what he's making today, at least. And I think it's also fair to say with the roster and the decor that he's definitely in the conversation for being one of the top couple best defensemen on the team based on his previous history. It's hard to say. I know there's obviously, Hanifin, Rasmus Anderson. He's certainly right up there with those guys for sure. We're not going to have a debate right now on who's better, but he's certainly right up there. Get Chris Tanev as well. Now, I'm not sure if Tanev is going to be available to start the year or not, because I know he did have a pretty significant shoulder injury to end his season last year. I'm not sure where his rehab and everything is at with that. They've also got Nikita Zadorov, who they brought back on a free agent contract, and then they have youngsters like Oliver Shillington and Juuso Valimaki. Now, Valimaki I can see getting moved. He seemed to be falling out of favor early with Daryl Sutter. I'm not sure that he really fits there long term, but you got, obviously, with Weegar, you got Hanifin, Anderson, Tanev. Is likely going to be your top four when Tanev is ready. And then they said you still got Zadorov, Shillington, Valimaki, but they might want to move somebody who's making a little bit more money to kind of level things out financially. So I do wonder who might become available there. I would think that maybe Zadorov might be the guy they would prefer, but it might have to be somebody more significant depending on what Weegar's contract works out to be. There's also been some talk that the Flames would still like to add another forward as well, because if you look at their forward group, they obviously have some pretty good high-end forwards, but there's not a lot of depth there, and they could probably use somebody else who could play in the bottom six. They've been linked to some of the other, few remaining free agents that are out there, like your, Evan Rodriguez or Sonny Milano. Like one of those guys might end up there. It's hard to say. But depending on where these extension talks go, I do think the Flames are going to have to end up making a subsequent move. But where the contract wouldn't kick in until next year doesn't necessarily have to be something that they address or deal with right away. It can be wait until either later in the year or even into next offseason is a possibility as well. Now, as I mentioned, I do want to talk about Patrick Kane and his future. Obviously, he's entering the final year of his contract along with Captain Jonathan Toews. Lots of speculation on where they're going to end up. Are they going to remain in Chicago? Are they going to get traded this year? I do think that, the odds are quite high that we will see a trade sometime between now and the deadline, but I really don't think it's going to be much ahead of the deadline. Maybe a little bit, but I think it's going to be couple of the names that we watch closely all year. If you think about it, really, for Patrick Kane, if he's going to want an opportunity to kind of be picky and, if he's going to finish out this year and go to a team for a potential run on for another Stanley Cup, you think he'd want to wait until closer to the deadline, see who's good, who's really got the best chance, kind of narrow down one or two top choices and give that to Chicago to work with for a trade. Kind of like what we saw Claude Giroux do last year. He kind of named his spot that he would waive because these guys do have full no-move clauses, right? So he's going to call a shot regardless. So unfortunately, it puts the team in a predicament where they're not likely going to get as much of a return as you might think, given the fact that there's not a lot of leverage there. So we'll see where that goes. But I know one interesting team that it seemed like was going through Toronto media there back probably about a week and a half, 2 weeks ago was Kane to the Leafs. There's all kinds. Everybody's talking about it. We talked about it here on the channel. Lots of Toronto media articles, videos, all kinds of things out there about it. And I know Chris Johnston, who's a very well-connected insider, not only around the NHL, but I think especially with the Maple Leafs. I know, of course, being based in Toronto and everything that he's kind of talked about in the past, it seems like his intel on the Leafs are probably better than a lot of other teams. Not to say that his other info isn't good, but it just seems like he tends to get more of the inside scoop on them, a little bit easier. He must have better sources and connections there. So he thinks that a Kane trade to the Leafs is very, very unlikely. On his recent podcast episode, poured cold water all over it, citing the difficulty with the cap and financially how hard it would be. He said obviously Chicago would have to eat half of it, but even then it would still be a challenge, not to mention that the Leafs don't really need another big offensive player. Like, they might want to look at other areas of the team, which is all things that we kind of talked about a bit before when we talked about Kane to the Leafs and all the speculation back, like I said, I'm not sure, it was somewhere about a week or two ago. We talked about all those same things. As much as it'd be really fun and interesting to think about, is he the right player? Which is one of the big questions I posed in that video. Is he really what the Leafs should focus on for an acquisition at the deadline? Is that what's going to take to put them over the top to finally win in the playoffs and have a shot at a Stanley Cup? I don't think he makes them worse by no means. He's still a great player, but he may not exactly be what they need to go, over the top and win. So I don't know. I mean, it's fun to think about, but it's not what it cracks up to be. Like, they might want to focus on, more on the defensive side of things. And we really don't know where the Leafs are going to be this year either, right? The season hasn't started yet. I know on paper they've made a few changes, but the big core group is mostly all still there, minus a couple things. Goaltending change this year. How's that going to work out? They have some other questions, right? Like, you think that on paper they're definitely going to be a good team, I have no doubt. But how good are they going to be? Where are their weaknesses going to be? Where should they focus come the deadline? That's a little bit early to predict. A lot of that's going to be dependent by injuries, how people play. Like, there's just a lot of factors there that it's just tough to predict. And having another big-time offensive weapon playing your top six may not, as much as that's, like I said, a nice to have, nice thought, is it really what they need? So, I mean, really, if you think about it, Elliotte Friedman, on the other hand, has confirmed legitimate interest from the Edmonton Oilers. And yes, they would have also cap difficulty making it happen. But that interest from, in what Oilers media were talking about, is it would have to be a three-way deal. They'd have to pay a pretty price, because not only are they going to have to pay Chicago a decent return to eat half that money, but then they're going to have to pay a third team to eat another chunk of it to knock it down to essentially about 25%. And then it becomes more affordable, but the price goes up because you're paying somebody else to rent their cap space. So at the same time, that interest is legit. Yes, it would be a big price, but we've got confirmation there. And really, dating back to the last year or so, Friedman also confirmed the legit interest from the Avalanche. Now, of course, they've since won a Stanley Cup and they're in a different spot now. But I know even last year, it was confirmed that they were inquiring to see if he was available, would he consider moving, and what it might take to maybe do a deal. Of course, things never got serious, but the interest was there, and it's believed that the New York Rangers are heavily interested in that kind of thing as well, and we'll see what they do, because they had a good run last year, and they might be a big player at the deadline too. So those are three teams that we have not really been able to kind of debunk and say, no, this doesn't make... Either A, doesn't make sense, they couldn't do it, or it's just, we've had inside information from the connected source to say that they're absolutely not interested or not happening, what like CJ's talked about with the Leafs. So, again, he didn't say that the Leafs were, absolutely anything, but he did say that a lot of the insiders do talk. And he said they have an insiders group chat, and he said that once that story started spreading around through media and social media, that some of them were talking in the group chat saying, hey, does anybody have any information on the Leaf thing? I've been away at the cottage for the last few days, haven't really been talking to my sources or connections. What's going on here? Nobody really knew anything about it. We know not all rumors come to be, and sometimes as much as they can be fun to discuss and think about and look at different scenarios, they don't always happen. It's just that simple. A lot of times they do, a lot of times they don't. And Kane to the Leafs, to me, as much as it's an interesting thought, is unlikely. But those other teams, to me, are much more likely teams to watch. That team, the teams to watch also could grow and change throughout the year. Like I said, we'll have to wait and see what happens, because he's definitely going to be calling his own shot. And we'll decide basically where he's going to end up. I know a lot of people are convinced that as a free agent next year, that he might go home to Buffalo. But we'll see where things are at and see what kind of year the Sabres have and see if there is any legit interest on that. Maybe next offseason. That could be a big story next summer possibly. So we'll see where things go. So let me know your thought. Where is the most sense for Kane to end up? Do you think CJ is right that the Leafs don't make any sense in this scenario and the other teams that we've talked about? Maybe give some mock trades in the comments and discuss where you think is most likely for him to land. We'll talk about that further in the comments. And of course, if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with the latest news, rumors, and analysis on all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.